Imagine a Batman movie, unlike any other, a daring, standalone cinematic adventure that dared to redefine the iconic Dark Knight for the big screen. That's precisely what Ben Affleck had boldly envisioned before ultimately, and reluctantly, stepping away from the cape and cowl. This is the fascinating but ill-fated tale of the Bat Project that tantalizingly never came to be.
Before we continue with our video, here's a reminder to click the Store tab on any of our JoBlo channels and browse our collection of the latest and freshest designs in our merch store. Go get you some.
From the outset, Affleck conceived his planned film as an immersive, groundbreaking character study steeped in brooding Gothic ambiance. Rather than a conventional superhero spectacle, his story would intimately explore the gritty underbelly of a Bruce Wayne pushing 50 and facing the physically and psychologically crippling twilight of his brutal crime-fighting career. The narrative's central antagonist was to be the formidable Slade Wilson, the mercenary better known as Deathstroke. With Affleck drawing inspiration from revered Batman comics, craft a plot he described as enthralling detective story for the world's greatest detective. This darker, grittier, creative modus operandi represented a tonal sea change from the bombastic, VFX-laden team-up adventures that defined the DC Extended Universe. While those effects-driven ensemble stories had their pleasures, Affleck's ambition was to strip away the conventional franchise bloat and razzle-dazzle. In its place, he sought to create a masterful modern noir crime drama that would grip viewers with its realistic, psychologically probing examination of the tremendous physical toil and psychological darkness inherent to Bruce Wayne's traumatized existence. What made Affleck's singular creative vision so tantalizing was not merely his star power, but his firm determination to elevate the project as more than just a paycheck gig. With fierce authorial ambition, he planned to not only lead the film as its brooding central star, but to guide it as both writer and director, an auteur-driven undertaking of remarkable personal investment. Those privileged few industry insiders who glimpsed Affleck's script during its development were virtually unanimous in their effusive praise. Jay Oliva, a respected veteran comic book storyteller and director for the acclaimed DC animation division, unhesitatingly lauded it as the best Batman script I've ever read. Wow. Such lofty admiration from a creative talent so deeply steeped in the lore and mythology of the Dark Knight speaks volumes about the script's intrinsic quality and reverential understanding of the titular character. Oliva, however, was far from alone in his emphatic admiration for Affleck's daring, psychologically enriched take on the Batman mythos. In a remarkable convergence of consensus, multiple trusted insiders who reviewed the script described it as quote-unquote, fucking awesome, and even boldly proclaimed that Affleck's film would have put Christopher Nolan's revered Dark Knight trilogy to shame. High praise indeed from hard-to-impress industry professionals concerning a narrative many viewers had been hotly anticipating for years.
I believe you.
So why, then, did this potentially revolutionary and critically lauded Batman film that had fans salivating ultimately never materialize? According to the reports that have emerged, Affleck's agonizing decision to depart the high-profile project stemmed from an interlocking series of factors: personal, professional, and philosophical. At the most fundamental level were Affleck's candid and well-documented struggles with alcohol addiction, a profoundly personal demon about which he has been admirably open and honest over the years. Some sources closely involved with the project speculated that Affleck may have harbored justifiable concerns, specifically that the immense pressures, public scrutiny, and wildly heightened expectations inherent to writing, directing, and starring in a mega-budgeted franchise blockbuster of this scope and scale could potentially trigger a relapse that could jeopardize his hard-won sobriety.
Do you plead?
Another factor, according to inside reports, were simmering creative differences between Affleck's singularly ambitious auteur-driven vision and the profit-driven corporate interests of the film's producers at Warner Brothers. Affleck, by many accounts, had conceived and crafted a film purposely designed as a highbrow, grounded, standalone, psychological character study, bringing a gritty verisimilitude and noir grittiness to the Batman mythos. Warner Brothers, however, was said to be significantly more invested in upholding the interconnected continuity of their established DCEU, having poured hundreds of millions into constructing their grand, unified, costume crime fighter cinematic canon. The studio was undoubtedly hesitant to greenlight and finance a radically re-envisioned Batman story that could potentially deviate too far from their established big-budget comic book film formula.
Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again.
And complicate their long-term world-building aspirations. With Affleck doggedly committed to his uncompromising creative path, and Warner Brothers prioritizing the commercial imperatives of their blockbuster franchise machine, an impasse began to loom. Ultimately, in 2017, Affleck reached the difficult decision that his professional interests and personal well-being would be best served by stepping away from his audacious passion project entirely. This abandonment of Affleck's long-gestating Batman film produced understandable shockwaves of dismay and disappointment among the project's fervent fans. For years, they had eagerly awaited the arrival of this grounded, comparatively mature exploration of their favorite comic book character, one that creatives like Oliva insisted would have been a game-changing masterstroke thanks to its gritty sophistication and resonant psychological depth. More tangibly, Affleck's exit from the Batman director's chair also left an undeniable void in the carefully strategized multi-year release slate that had been meticulously mapped for the DCEU. In the wake of this unfortunate vacancy, Warner Brothers would eventually pivot in a new creative direction. They brought in the talented Matt Reeves to spearhead a new cinematic iteration of the Batman mythos that would become 2022's The Batman, starring Robert Pattinson. While a memorable and admirably idiosyncratic psychological crime thriller in its own right, Reeves' film could not help but lack the distinctive auteur-driven singularity of vision and bold personal investment that Affleck had brought to his unrealized project. For Affleck himself, however, his aborted Batman film represented something far more deeply intimate and personally resonant than a mere professional creative undertaking. By all accounts, this was a years-in-the-making passion project into which the writer-director had poured his heart, soul, and a tremendous amount of emotional investment and thoughtful introspection. According to those privy to the behind-the-scenes creative process, Affleck's screenplay tapped profoundly into his own complex psyche, perhaps representing a form of deeply cathartic self-exploration. The whispers that emerged suggested Affleck had envisioned his film as a form of artistic penance.
That's fear.
An opportunity to both redeem himself for the divisive fan backlash to his performance in the critically derided Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice.
Save Martha!
While offering a rich, sophisticated, and definitive take on the Dark Knight's compelling psychodrama. For Affleck, a longtime Bat fan deeply reverential of the character's 80-year cultural legacy, the abandonment of this ambitious personal vision surely left a bitter tang of disappointment. Regardless of the financial incentives, Affleck seemed to view this not merely as just another paycheck franchise project, but as a creatively fulfilling apotheosis, a chance for him to craft a prestigious, critically exalted psychological crime saga that would secure his legacy as an artistically uncompromising auteur. No small emotional investment for the film's profoundly passionate creator. Indeed, having already experienced the tremendous pressures and public scrutiny inherent to embodying such an iconic figure on the big screen in previous DCEU films, Affleck surely understood the psychological toll of attempting to capture the immense complexity of Bruce Wayne/Batman's fractured psyche. The prospect of not just inhabiting that tormented persona, but breathing life into it as director and sole storytelling visionary must have represented an overwhelming burden, an immense personal challenge.
Affleck, you don't bomb in Phantom, Joe!
Doubly so when compounded by his sobriety struggles. So, what exactly made Affleck's unrealized Batman film so tantalizingly compelling, and such a potentially seismic rupture from typical comic book film conventions? From the story details that have trickled into the public consciousness, it's clear the actor/writer/director had reverse-engineered a radical revision to the typical superhero film template, one that rejected excessive CGI spectacle and action theatrics in favor of a grounded, character-driven, almost scientific study of Batman's unique psychological deconstruction. Rather than rendering the Dark Knight as a gruff, perpetually furrow-browed badass, Affleck's take arguably would have deconstructed and psychoanalyzed Bruce Wayne's fractured psyche through an unflinchingly realistic lens. His Batman would not be a CGI-enhanced force of nature, but a grizzled and weary veteran, reeling from decades spent waging his brutal one-man war on crime. The narrative's core would shift away from the typical genre's over-reliance on action pyrotechnics and toward a more searing psychological realism, a deep-dive exploration of the profound mental toll of Bruce's trauma-forged vigilantism and the bodily deterioration inflicted by years of physical punishment. While dazzling set pieces would surely still play a role, they would underscore the steep personal price the Dark Knight paid for his crusade, rather than merely serving as vacant visual confection. This novel-grounded approach, one that would pull the detective and gothic psychological horror aspects into the spotlight as never before, promised to resonate with fans ravenous for truly uncompromising, mature Batman story. One more focused on exhuming the profoundly disturbing psychological truths festering in the murky soul of the character than simply widescreen comic book theatrics. By finally daring to depict the unvarnished darkness and psychological anguish at Batman's core, instead of indulging in crowd-pleasing fantasy, Affleck's passion project seemed poised to usher in a radical new era of subversively sophisticated superhero storytelling. An era where the genre's most compelling figures would not be reduced to shallow archetypes, but explored as authentic, profoundly flawed human beings. The loss of Affleck's psychologically rich Batman vision left a gaping void in the narrative roadmap of the DC Extended Universe. While Reeves' The Batman certainly explored some similarly dark and grounded territory, the film's central figure was an eccentric but relatively grounded detective, as opposed to the wearied, psychologically corroded crime fighter originally envisioned by Affleck. In the world of Affleck's unmade project, The Dark Knight was not merely another cookie-cutter franchise cog, but a singularly compelling human being, simultaneously waging an internal war against his own demons and an external battle to stem the tide of Gotham's criminal underworld. This was the transformative promise of the auteur's grounded, mature interpretation. While concrete plot specifics remain shrouded in mystery, a few tasty morsels have emerged over the years. According to Oliva, who collaborated with Affleck during early pre-production before his film's cancellation, the deadly mercenary Deathstroke was set to figure as the primary antagonist. However, the DC animation veteran also teased that Affleck's script enticingly wove in other iconic members of Batman's extensive rogues gallery of villains from across various eras and storylines. Oliva further hinted that the story would deftly blend and recontextualize narrative threads and character arcs from throughout the Dark Knight's rich 80-year mythology in strikingly innovative fashion. For longtime Bat fans, such an interweaving of previously disconnected tales from disparate sources could have proven utterly exhilarating. A refreshingly novel reimagining that still paid respectful reverence to the character's storied comic book chronology. Alas, Affleck's untimely exit from the high-profile blockbuster left a legion of burning questions forever unanswered and dangling cruelly in the imagination's hazy ether. Beyond broad narrative brushstrokes, we are left to ponder how exactly the filmmaker might have transfigured and embodied a grizzled, psychologically fractured Bruce Wayne driven to the raggedy edge. Which specific storylines and iconic villains could have made the leap to Affleck's gritty crime drama? How might the cavalcade of familiar foes have been remixed and recontextualized through the director's uncompromising creative lens? The lack of substantive details and definitive resolution regarding Affleck's deeply personal, heavily mythologized passion project can only amplify its increasingly legendary, almost mythic stature for fans. In the years since its cancellation, the aborted film has steadily accrued an enigmatic aura of promise and potential. The proverbial one that got away. A tantalizing glimpse of what might have been before that promise was so cruelly snuffed out. While concrete specifics may be permanently shrouded in the mists of ambiguity, one truth rings undeniable. Affleck's creative ambition represented a summit of potential rarefied air for the superhero genre. All the essential ingredients simmered together enticingly. A gritty, psychologically rich character study, a daring return to Batman's oft-neglected detective noir roots, and a talented writer-director intimately steeped in the source material's rich mythology and passionately invested in doing the iconic property justice. Alas, as is so often the case, a combustible combination of internal conflicts and external pressures conspired to prematurely extinguish this daring creative spark before it could fully ignite into a radically unprecedented cinematic inferno. A convergence of Affleck's personal struggles, Warner Brothers' corporate franchise interests, and seemingly irreconcilable creative disagreements all fueled the unfortunate implosion. And yet, the mere tantalizing idea of what Affleck's The Batman could have been continues to smolder, solidifying the aborted project's status as a beguiling what-if that captivates the imaginations of fans even years later. A cinematic artifact of might-have-been that haunts like the momentous road not taken. More than just another missed professional opportunity, this particular Bat Dream's demise stings with a profound sense of loss and mundane tragedy. We are left to ponder not just what narrative terrain may have been excavated, but what seismic reverberations it could have triggered across the entire superhero filmscape had it detonated as intended. For an Affleck's singularly gritty, character-focused, auteur-driven vision, one can perceive the glimmers of a potentially seismic paradigm shift in superhero filmmaking, a tonal reckoning, and generational changing of the guard, where such conventionally adolescent power fantasies embraced more mature, introspective mindsets and subversively deconstructed icons, rather than perpetually indulging in simple spectacle. Imagine a world where Affleck's passion project lived up to the buzz and the hype. A world where his searing psychological study of a disillusioned, battle-weary Batman reeling under decades of trauma represented not just a passion project, but a clarion call and template for a new era of superhero storytelling. An emboldening North Star illuminating a daring new frontier. Perhaps in this world, Affleck's film wouldn't just have been a critical and commercial juggernaut, but a tectonic game changer that jolted the entire genre out of its perpetual adolescent fantasia and into more daring narrative territory. A cinematic reckoning of cataclysmic proportions, where masked heroes are no longer simplistic power fantasies, but authentic human beings with all the shades of nuance and psychological complexity inherent to the human condition. In this speculative realm, comic book movies would no longer lazily default to mindless escapism and empty visual bedazzlement. Instead, viewers could lose themselves in rich psychological excavations of the toll that trauma can inflict, even upon seemingly indomitable, idealized avatars. Here, superhero spectacle would not be the end goal, but the Trojan horse delivering searing meditations on the ethical quagmires of moral absolutism, the psychological scars of violence, and humanity's never-ending struggle to protect its fragile, heroic ideals from crumbling under the immense pressures of darkness. Naturally, this hypothetical paradigm shift would surely have turbulent ramifications across the entire cultural conversation surrounding comic book films. Perhaps it unleashes a torrid backlash from embittered purists who reject this radical deconstruction of their once revered totems. Or maybe, just maybe, it ignites a long overdue evolution. One where discerning audiences and critics finally begin taking the medium as seriously as its creators always intended it to be received. Of course, this grandiose flight of fancy presupposes not just that Affleck's film stuck the metaphorical landing, but that it achieved such unprecedented levels of cultural impact and ubiquity as to fundamentally reshape the artistic landscape. An unlikely outcome even for an unmitigated creative and commercial triumph on the scale theorized. And yet, for all the gleefully fanciful hypotheticals it inspires, the mere fact that these tantalizing speculative threads even breathe speaks to the singularly compelling creative ambition Affleck's audacious Batman reboot once represented. A stirring, uncompromising testament to the subversive storytelling potential comic book films could achieve when guided by a uniquely reverential creative voice. While the specific reasons for this film's abandonment will forever remain shrouded in the obscuring fog of rumor and speculation, the mere fact that such an audacious take on an iconic character like Batman was once so tantalizingly close to reality itself is a thrilling notion to contemplate. More than just another superhero movie unmade, Affleck's aborted passion project represents a crystallization of ambition itself, a daring dream to transcend conventional genre boundaries and elevate the comic book movie into something richer, darker, and more profoundly resonant than audiences had yet experienced. In that sense, the mere idea of this film stands as a towering representation of the endless creative potential awaiting to be tapped from the deep wellsprings of our most treasured pop culture mythologies. An emboldening reminder that paradigm-shifting greatness can emerge when trailblazing artists are empowered to pursue their most wildly idiosyncratic personal visions without the constraining shackles of formulaic commercial conservatism. For even if the actual film itself never manifested, the sheer metatextual possibility it embodied is enough to inspire awe that, with the right creative alchemy, something as conventionally disposable as a trivial superhero movie could have been audaciously transmuted into sublime commentary on the nature of heroism itself. An introspective exploratory prism through which to refract the universal human struggles with morality, mortality, and existential self-definition. From this imagined nexus, entire alternating realities of uninhibited comic book movie storytelling await to be birthed into existence. Worlds where our most indelible crusaders are no longer flawless, one-dimensional masculine power fantasies, but authentic human beings replete with relatable insecurities, psychological scars, and profound reservations about the methods their metahuman abilities compel them to embrace. Perhaps in one such beguiling alternate timeline, Affleck's Batman isn't merely the trailblazer, but the opening salvo in a brave new era of cyberpunk-tinged super-narratives. Stories where the grungy anti-hero protectors, battered by endless trauma cycles, internalize the harsh truth that the same extraordinary abilities that empower them to dispense justice also inexorably distance them from the very people they've sworn to protect. In another potential stream, maybe the reverberations of Affleck's defiance inspire an entire generation of young upstart creatives to dream bigger, to reject paint-by-numbers creative sterilization in favor of unflinchingly idiosyncratic personal expression. A new vanguard of uncompromising visionaries who channel the intergenerational struggles, anxieties, and existential bewilderment of their age cohorts into daring cyberpunk-hued passion projects that double as both escapist superhero fantasies and profound spiritual self-exploration. Or perhaps this alternate universe's version of Affleck simply persists, undeterred in his defiant vision to deconstruct the Batman mythos into an even richer, darker psychological character study rife with profoundly uncompromising philosophical inquiries into true meaning of justice. A thematically murkier, morally relativistic tale, daring to delve so deeply into the abyss of human morality and subjective ethics that it catalyzes a heated global dialogue. Of course, these speculative fantasy scenarios all presume not only that Affleck's unmade film achieved widespread cultural ubiquity, but that its creative ambition and risk-taking impulses were so powerful as to prompt a seismic rewiring of the entire superhero film landscape as we know it. A fanciful proposition, to be certain, but also one that speaks to the intangible aura of promise and disruptive potential that surround the actor and director's aborted passion project. For even if the film itself never materialized, its sheer existence as a tantalizingly subversive idea, as an artifact symbolic of ambition unfettered by franchise imperatives, as irrefutable proof that idiosyncratic personal expression and childhood mythologies need not be mutually exclusive, well, perhaps that meta-accomplishment alone is enough to solidify its status as a tantalizing what-if worthy of eternal examination. Because at the end of the day, by daring to radically reevaluate how we emotionally and narratively engage with our most treasured pop culture demigods, Affleck's unrealized Batman reboot implicitly issued an emboldening challenge to stop taking the icons of our shared modern mythologies for granted as simple pawns in empty commercial brand maintenance exercises. to instead embrace them for their richly resonant potential as profoundly metaphorical vessels through which to explore the most fundamental facets of the human condition. In that regard, the mere fact that a daring creative voice like Affleck's was ever given an opportunity, however fleeting, to redefine our understanding of such an indelible figure as Batman, well, perhaps that singular refusal to settle for complacent regurgitation is the greatest inspirational legacy this aborted project could hope to impart. For in its own way, the mere idea that such an audacious revision to our ingrained cultural assumptions could be so breathtakingly close to reality is its own trailblazing act of defiance. A reassuring promise that even within the most commercial of corporate intellectual property minds, there yet remains an untapped multiverse of wildly subversive creative potential awaiting the right idiosyncratic visionary to unleash it. While the specific shape and thematic contours of Affleck's Batman's dreamscape remain permanently obscured to outside examination, the sheer fact that it once sparked so brightly in the collective cultural imagination is perhaps the most empowering message we could hope to glean from its extinguished ambitions. For in its own beautifully tragic way, the aborted passion project serves as a potent emblem of the endless unmapped storytelling possibilities that await whenever the shackles of conventional thinking are permanently struck away without fear or inhibition. A rallying totem to inspire creatives of all mediums to endlessly dream bigger, dig deeper, and pour every ounce of their idiosyncratic personal truth into each new artistic endeavor they conceive. After all, if even a figure as conventionally simplistic as a superhero can harbor such profound existential depths when filtered through a reverential auteur's lens, then perhaps there are no limits to what other narrative horizons lay in wait. No boundaries constraining the synergy of high-minded artistic ambition and myth-making reverence when unified with sufficient focus and passion. So, while the visceral inspiration sparks of Affleck's Dark Knight translation will forever smolder in flickering secrecy, the sheer, intangible concept it manifested is perhaps the greatest imaginable gift, a subversive symbolic affirmation that even the most disposable of fantasy confections can metaphysically transcend into something richer, more substantive, and profoundly imperishable when envisioned without restraint. It's that whisper of infinite potential, that refusal to ever abandon the audacious dreams of our fearless storytelling nomads, that may ultimately constitute Ben Affleck's most valuable real-world superpower, and a continually raging creative furnace capable of inspiring others to embrace the same liberated truth, that amid all boundaries, whether spiritual, commercial, or geometrically dimensional, there yet remains a universe of unexplored possibility worth fearlessly charging into, because if nothing else, that sense of infinite potential, of undiscovered frontiers of the imagination that await the right pioneering soul to blaze their trail toward it, well, perhaps that tantalizing promise is the most superpower we could ever dare to comprehend.